My name is Ellen, and if you told me 20 years ago that a few free after-school lessons would one day pay for my entire retirement, I would have laughed, shaken my head, and said you were confusing me with someone from a feel-good movie. I was a public school English teacher in a small Ohio town. We didn't use the words luxury and retirement in the same sentence. We used words like budget cuts, overcrowded classrooms, and please let the copy machine live through Friday. Back then, my life was ruled by bells and calendars. Now, my days are quieter. These days, my mornings start with the soft creak of old floorboards and the familiar grumble of my knees as I swing my legs out of bed. I shuffle into my tiny kitchen, still painted the same warm yellow my late husband picked out nearly 40 years ago. The paint is chipped in a few places, but it's comforting, like an old sweater that's been washed too many times. I put on a pot of coffee, the same cheap brand I've bought for years. The machine sputters and hisses, complaining just enough to remind me we're both getting older. While it brews, I turn on the radio. The announcer's voice fills the room, talking about traffic, the weather, and some new chain store opening 2 towns over. I half listen as I reach for my little floral notebook, my planner, though there's not much to plan these days. When I was still teaching, every inch of that planner used to be crammed with notes. 3rd period quiz, call Mrs. Anderson, submit grades, department meeting, bring data. Now, the pages look almost empty. On this particular Tuesday, only one word is written in neat blue ink: groceries. I sit down at the small wooden table my husband and I bought at a yard sale when we were first married. Varnish has worn away in spots, and one leg wobbles unless you wedge a folded napkin under it. I've grown used to leaning just so, finding the angle where everything stays steady. It's funny how much of life is like that. I put on my reading glasses and start a list. Milk, eggs, bread, yogurt if it's on sale, blueberries with a little question mark next to them. The question mark isn't an accident. Stand in front of that produce section at least twice a month, staring at those tiny containers of fruit. I do the math in my head, price per ounce, then mentally add in the electric bill, the rising cost of my prescriptions, and the fact that my water heater is making that odd banging sound again. Most days, the blueberries don't make it into the cart. I circle the word lightly and sigh. Aging on a teacher's pension isn't impossible, but it requires a constant, careful sort of thinking. Get used to measuring treats in coupons and discounts. When my younger sister sends me postcards from cruises or beach vacations with her husband, I'm happy for her. But there's a little part of me that quietly thinks, that was never in the cards for me, and that's okay. I collect my mug from the counter, now full of coffee, and sit back down. I watch a squirrel dart along the fence, outside the window, bushy tail twitching, as it pauses to scold some unseen enemy. The sky is a flat, early morning gray, the kind that could turn into sunshine or rain, depending on its mood. It all feels very ordinary, comfortably, completely ordinary. What I don't know, as I sit there sipping my coffee and debating blueberries, is that this ordinary Tuesday is going to be the day everything starts to change. The first sign that something is different comes, of all things, with the mail. Our mail carrier is one of those men who seem to move at the same pace, no matter what's happening around them. Rain, snow, heat wave, holiday rush, his footsteps crunch over my walkway at the exact same time most days, just after noon. But today, I hear the familiar squeak of the mailbox lid much earlier. I glance at the clock on the wall. It's not even 10. Well, that's new, I mumble to myself. Curious, I slip into my comfortable shoes, pull my cardigan tighter around me, and make my way down the short path to the street. The air has a little bite to it, not quite cold, but cool enough to remind me that my light jacket will have to come out of the closet soon. I open the mailbox and see the usual stack: a utility bill, a glossy catalog for kitchen gadgets I'll never buy, a coupon booklet, and then I see it. One envelope stands out from the rest. It's a soft cream color, a little thicker than standard paper. My name and address are written neatly on the front in blue ink. There's no printed logo, no bold return address from a company, just a simple handwritten line in the upper left corner with a town name I don't recognize. There's something almost old-fashioned about it. I tuck the stack under my arm and walk back inside, my heart beating a tiny bit faster for reasons I can't quite explain. Over the years, I've gotten my share of unexpected notes, holiday cards from former students, updates about weddings or babies, a few grateful letters from parents. Each one has been a little thread connecting me back to the life I used to live in room 212, down the English hallway, next to the perpetually broken drinking fountain. I set the bills and junk mail aside on the counter and carry the cream envelope over to the table, sitting down with the same care I used when lowering myself into the hard plastic chairs in the teacher's lounge. For a moment, I just hold it, feeling the texture of the paper between my fingers. It's silly, I know, but I'm almost nervous. I slide my thumb gently under the flap and open it, taking care not to tear anything. Inside, there's a single sheet of thick stationery and a small, crisp card I don't look at yet. My eyes go straight to the top of the letter. Dear Miss Collins, it begins. I feel a little tug at my chest at those two words. Most people call me Ellen these days. The only ones who still call me Miss Collins are the nurses at the clinic when they first read my chart, and occasionally a former student who runs into me at the grocery store and squeals, "Oh my gosh, Miss Collins, is that you?" Eyes move down the page. You may not remember me, the letter says, but you once changed everything for a girl who sat in the back row and thought she was too stupid to deserve your time. I freeze. There are certain sentences that feel like someone has opened a long closed door in your memory and let in a rush of air. That line does exactly that. I lean back slowly, the chair creaking beneath me, and tighten my grip on the paper to hide the slight tremble in my hands. I keep reading. I have been trying to find you for some time. Years ago, I made myself a promise. If I ever reached a place in life where I could give back to the teacher who first believed in me, I would do it, no matter how long it took or how far I had to search. At the bottom of the page, just above the signature, there's one more line. I will be in town this week. If you're comfortable with it, I would love to visit you and thank you in person. Eyes drop to the name written at the end, and when I see it, the vague stirring of recognition sharpens into something clear and solid. Mia Rivera. I say it out loud, testing the sound of it in my empty kitchen. Mia. It's as if the years suddenly fold back on themselves, like pages turning in a well-worn book. I'm no longer sitting at my wobbly kitchen table as a retiree. I'm back in my classroom, with chalk dust on my hands and my voice slightly hoarse from reading out loud. Room 212, second floor, end of the hallway. The memory comes back slowly at first, then all at once. It was my 18th year of teaching when Mia first walked into my life. I remember that because by then, I knew the rhythms of a school year the way a musician knows a song. I could tell you, almost to the week, when the first big wave of colds would hit, when the seniors would start getting restless, when the staff would begin murmuring about budget rumors. I knew which kids would sit in the front row with their pens poised, and which would slump in the back with their hoodies pulled halfway over their faces. That afternoon had been perfectly ordinary, the way so many important days are. The hallway smelled like a mix of floor cleaner and whatever they were serving in the cafeteria for lunch. My juniors were shuffling in, talking too loudly, negotiating over who would sit where. I was erasing the last of my notes from the board and writing the day's agenda in my careful, looping handwriting. That's when the guidance counselor appeared at the door, with a girl standing slightly behind her. The counselor had that overly bright smile she always wore when she was doing something she knew would be uncomfortable for the student. The girl beside her looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She was thin, with long dark hair pulled into a low ponytail, and she clutched the straps of her backpack so tightly her knuckles were white. "Class," the counselor announced, in a voice a little too cheerful, "we have a new student joining us today. This is Mia. She's just moved here, so I know you'll all make her feel welcome." A few heads turned. A few kids mumbled a half-hearted hi. Most of them barely looked up from their phones or notebooks. It wasn't cruelty. It was just high school, the kind of place where everyone is so caught up in their own anxieties that they hardly have room for someone else's. I smiled at the girl and stepped forward. "Hi, Mia," I said. "I'm Miss Collins. We're just getting started on a new unit, so it's actually a pretty good time to join us. You can sit anywhere you like." She gave me a quick, polite nod, then scanned the room the way a skittish animal might scan a field for predators. I watched her eyes move over the front row, over the clumps of friends, over the empty chairs. After a moment, she headed, as so many new kids did, to the back row. She slid into a seat by the window, setting her backpack down on the floor with a soft thud. I'd seen that exact body language before. Quiet, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes down, but alert. Not indifferent, not checked out. Just cautious. Like someone who'd learned to expect that the world might not be kind. I remember thinking, as I turned back to the board, "All right, Mia. Let's see what story you're carrying." At the time, it was just one more thought in a long line of similar moments. I had no idea that this quiet girl in the back row would, one day, track me down across the years with a letter that would change the rest of my life. I refold the stationery carefully and pick up the smaller card that came with it. It's a simple, professional-looking business card with her name, Mia Rivera, printed in clean, modern letters. Underneath her name is a title that makes my eyebrows rise: Founder and CEO. There's a company name I don't recognize, a sleek logo, an email address, and a phone number. I let out a low whistle, even though no one's there to hear it. "Well, Mia," I say softly, "you certainly landed on your feet." For a long moment, I just sit there, the letter, and the card on the table in front of me, my coffee growing cold at my elbow. Images of the girl she used to be flicker through my mind. The oversized sweatshirt she wore almost every day. The way she wrapped her arms around herself when she walked down the halls. The way she winced whenever I called on her to read. Do I remember her? Yes, I do. Remember the day she stayed behind after class, hovering awkwardly by my desk, while the rest of the students spilled out into the hallway. I remember her voice, barely above a whisper, when she asked me a question that would lead to those after-school sessions, the sessions she's talking about in this letter, the ones I honestly hadn't thought about in years. I looked down at her neat handwriting again. "If you're comfortable with it, I would love to visit you and thank you in person," she wrote. Am I comfortable with it? It's a surprising question to wrestle with. My life has gotten small since I retired. Predictable. The days blur together in a rhythm of errands, church, the occasional lunch with an old colleague, a phone call with my sister, a crossword puzzle at the kitchen table. Part of me feels a quick flutter of anxiety at the idea of a visitor, especially one from so far back in my past. What will we talk about? How much will she expect me to remember? What if I don't recognize her right away? But under that nervous flicker, something else stirs, something warmer, a sense of gratitude, curiosity, hope, maybe. I walk over to the small calendar that hangs on the wall near the fridge. My days are mostly empty squares, but next to Friday, I write in careful script. Mia, 2 p.m. I may not know exactly what she wants to say to me. I may not remember every detail of who she was as a teenager, but I do know one thing. If a former student travels all the way back to a small Ohio town to say thank you, the least I can do is open the door. I stand there for a few seconds longer, looking at the date I've just written. Then I set the pen down, take a slow breath, and turn back toward my coffee, which has gone lukewarm. I drink it anyway. As I rinse the cup in the sink, I catch my reflection in the window. White hair pulled back into a loose bun. Faint lines etched around my eyes and mouth. Woman who spent nearly 4 decades telling teenagers that words matter, that stories matter, that they matter. Founder and CEO, I murmur, shaking my head with a small smile. Well, good for you, kiddo. I don't know yet that in a few days, that kiddo will walk up my front path, not as a scared girl in an oversized sweatshirt, but as a confident woman in a tailored suit, carrying a gift I never expected, one that will turn my careful, modest retirement into something I once would have thought belonged only to other people. For now, all I know is that Mia is coming, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the routines and the aches and the years, a part of me that used to greet 30 teenagers every morning with a smile and a good to see you, let's begin, wakes up just a little. By the time Friday arrives, my house has never been so tidy. It's ridiculous, really. I've hosted book clubs, holiday dinners, even a retirement party in this little place. And yet somehow, the idea of one former student coming over has me dusting picture frames and rearranging throw pillows like the queen is dropping by. I polish the kitchen table, even though the worn patches in the wood aren't going anywhere, and I straighten the curtains 3 times before finally forcing myself to sit down. I tell myself I'm just being hospitable. The truth is, I'm nervous. Every so often, I walk down the hallway and stop in front of the mirror. I smooth my hair. I adjust my blouse. I frown at the deep lines around my mouth that weren't there when I last saw Mia as a teenager. I wonder what she'll see when she looks at me now. Do I look like the same woman who stood at the front of room 212, writing quotes on the board and reminding kids to put their phones away? At 1:30, I make a fresh pot of coffee and set out 2 mugs. 1:45, I sit on the couch, but pop up again almost immediately, my mind racing with what ifs. What if she doesn't come? What if she does come and realizes I'm not the person she remembers? What if I open the door and I don't recognize her at all? I'm in the middle of rehearsing a polite greeting in my head when I finally hear it, the sound that will divide my life into before and after. The doorbell rings. It's a simple sound, 2 short chimes. My heart gives a little leap anyway. I wipe my hands on my slacks, even though they aren't sweaty, take a breath, and walk to the door. When I open it, I see a woman standing on my porch who looks like she stepped out of a magazine about successful professionals. She's in a dark, tailored suit that fits her perfectly, with a soft cream blouse underneath. Her dark hair is cut in a sleek, shoulder-length style that frames her face, and there's a leather bag hanging from her shoulder that probably costs more than my first car did. For a split second, I don't recognize her. Then she smiles. That's what does it. The nervous curve at the corners of her mouth, the way her eyes get a little smaller when she smiles, like she isn't sure yet if she's allowed to be happy in this moment. "Hi," she says softly. "Miss Collins." Sound of that name in her voice knocks the years away. "Mia," I ask, even though I already know. She nods, and I feel my own face stretching into a smile that I hope doesn't look as shaky as it feels. "Oh my goodness," I say, opening the door wider. "Look at you. Come in, come in." She steps inside, glancing around my small living room with quick, assessing eyes. Not judgmental, just taking it all in. The framed photos on the wall of my husband, my sister, and a scattering of old class pictures. Shade blanket folded over the back of the couch. The bookshelf filled with worn novels and old yearbooks. "It's so good to see you," she says, her voice thickening just a little on the words. "You too," I say. "You look wonderful, grown up," I laugh. "That's a silly thing to say. Of course you're grown up, but you know what I mean." She laughs too, and some of the tightness in the room eases. "I still feel like that girl in the back row sometimes," she says. "But yes, I guess I did a little growing up." I gesture toward the kitchen. "Can I get you some coffee? Tea, water, Coffee would be great, she says. Black, please. Ah, one of those, I tease lightly. The brave ones. She smiles, and I head to the kitchen, my hands moving automatically through the familiar motions of pouring coffee and setting mugs on the table. Behind me, I hear her walking slowly around the living room. You kept this, she says suddenly, her voice filled with surprise. Turn to see what she's talking about and see her standing in front of a framed paper on the wall. It's a typed poem written by one of my students years ago, printed on cheap white paper, but mounted carefully in a simple black frame. At the bottom, in green ink, I had written, A+, thank you for letting us see your heart. I walk over with the coffee. Of course I kept it, I say. He was one of the first students who made me think, okay, maybe I can actually teach writing. She studies it for another moment, then turns back to me. You were always good at that, she says, making people think they could do something. We sit down at the table. She sets her bag on the floor and wraps her hands around the warm mug, as if grounding herself. I take a sip of my own coffee, then set it down, deciding to just say what's on my mind. Your letter meant a lot to me, I tell her. I do remember you, new in the middle of the year, quiet. That in the back by the window. She smiles shyly. That sounds like me, she says. I was trying so hard not to be seen. You were seen, I say gently. Maybe not by everyone, but I saw you. Her eyes glisten, and she looks down at her coffee for a moment before speaking. I can't tell you how relieved I am to hear you say you remember me, she says. I know you had so many students. I kept thinking, what if I show up and she has no idea who I am? I laugh softly. Oh, me. May not remember every quiz you took, but I remember you asking if I ever did extra help after school. I tilt my head. Do you remember that? She lets out a breath that sounds almost like a laugh and a sob tangled together. Of course I do, she says. I was terrified. I lean back slightly, letting the memory pull me in. You waited until everyone left the room, I say. You walked up to my desk, but you couldn't quite look me in the eyes. You asked if I ever did tutoring. You rushed to tell me you couldn't pay. Her cheeks flush, and she nods. I thought you'd say no, she says quietly. Or that you'd tell me to find some program or wait for a counselor or something. What did I say? I ask her, even though I remember. She gives me a watery smile. You said, you don't have to pay me. Come by on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school, and we'll figure this out. I smile and nod. That sounds like me, I say. You looked like you needed someone to tell you it wasn't hopeless. It felt hopeless, she whispers. Back then, everything felt too hard. We sit in silence for a moment, the steam from our coffee curling up between us. Tell me, I say gently, what was going on then? If you're comfortable sharing, of course. I knew you were struggling, but teachers only see one angle. She takes a deep breath. It's a long story, she says, but I came here today to tell you all of it, because you were one of the first people who changed its direction. I fold my hands and nod. I have time, I say. Start wherever you want. She smiles faintly. Okay, she says. Then let me take you back to junior year. That's when everything was falling apart. She looks past me for a moment, as if she's seeing something far away, then begins. When I showed up in your classroom, she says, we just moved into that little apartment over on Mercer Street. You probably know the kind, thin walls, noisy neighbors, one window that doesn't open all the way. I nod. I do know the kind. I've had students from those buildings before. My mom had just left my stepdad, she continues. There was a lot of yelling, and more going on than yelling. One night, she packed 2 bags, shook me awake, and said, we're leaving. Now, we left with exactly what we could carry, and whatever cash she'd managed to hide. He shrugs, but I can see how hard it is for her to talk about this. We moved in with a friend of hers for a while, she says, then a cheap motel, then finally that little apartment. Every move meant a new school, and I was always behind. By the time I landed in your class, I'd missed a bunch of weeks of that year. Different schools use different books, different pacing. You know how it is. I nod again, my chest tight. I remember your test scores, I say softly. They weren't terrible, but they were uneven. like someone who knew some things really well and had big gaps in other areas. Exactly, she says. I could read, obviously, but all that stuff, theme, symbolism, essay structure, it felt like a foreign language. Every time a teacher asked us to analyze something, I'd freeze. Other kids seemed to just get it. They'd raise their hands and say things that sounded smart, and I'd sit there thinking, is there a secret class where they explain what this all means and nobody told me about it? I can't help but smile at that. Oh, I wish there had been a secret class, I say. I would have signed up too, she laughs, and some of the heaviness in her voice lifts. The worst part, she says, was that I started believing I was just stupid, especially with English. Numbers I could kind of manage. There's a right answer or there is. But essays, open-ended questions, I'd stare at the blank page and hear this voice in my head saying, "You're not smart enough for this. Don't embarrass yourself." I remember the way she'd grip her pencil so tightly her knuckles turned white. The way she'd turn in tests with entire sections left blank, even though I knew she'd read the material. I wish you told me you felt that way back then, I say quietly. I didn't have the words for it, she says. All I knew was that every time I took a test, my stomach hurt. Every time you handed papers back, I'd feel my heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. When I saw that first D on one of your quizzes, I thought, there it is. Proof. I don't belong in this class. My heart twists. I remember that quiz, I say. It was on metaphor and personification. You got every definition question right and almost every example wrong. She grins, embarrassed. Yeah, she says. Sounds right. You didn't understand that you already knew what those things were, I say. You used them yourself when you talked. You just didn't know the names. That's a very fixable problem. She looks at me with something like wonder. You always said things like that, she says. That problems were fixable. I'd never heard a grown-up talk like that about school stuff. It was usually, you're behind, you need to catch up, or you're not trying hard enough. But you'd say, this is a gap. Gaps can be filled. We sip our coffee and fall into the memory of those after-school sessions. I remember the first day you stayed after, I say. The classroom was so quiet compared to the usual chaos. Her eyes sparkle with recognition. The sun coming in through the windows, she says. Dust floating in the air. You sitting on the edge of a student desk instead of behind your own. I did that, I ask, amused. You did, she says. I think you knew I was intimidated by your big teacher desk. Smart of me, I say dryly. She chuckles. You opened my notebook, she continues, and you didn't start by pointing out everything I'd done wrong. You asked me to tell you, in my own words, what the story we were reading was about. What did I say? I ask. Her voice softens. I said, it's about this guy who doesn't want to admit he's lonely, so he pretends he doesn't care about anyone. But deep down, he's scared he'll always be alone. I remember it now. Remember thinking, she gets it. She absolutely understood the heart of the story. She just didn't know how to translate that into the kind of answer a test was asking for. You looked at me, she says, and you said, that is exactly what this story is about. You just analyzed the main character and identified the theme. Now we're going to put those exact thoughts into the kind of sentences your test wants to see. I smile. That was one of my favorite teaching tricks, I say. It's think they don't know how to do something, but really, they just don't speak school language yet. Once you show them it's just a translation job, things get a little less scary. Those afternoons quickly became a routine. Twice a week, she'd linger in the doorway after the final bell, while my other students poured out into the hallway like a flood breaking loose. She'd wait until the noise died down, then take her seat at the desk closest to mine. We de-work through everything slowly. Sometimes we'd read a paragraph out loud together. Sometimes I'd ask her to explain a scene to me as if she were telling it to a friend. I'd circle her sentences and say, this right here, this is good, this is clear thinking. We're going to build around this. Do you remember the day I cried? She asks suddenly. I think for a moment, then nod. You got a C+ on a test, I say. And you burst into tears. She laughs, wiping at her eyes at the memory. It sounds ridiculous now, she says. C plus isn't exactly spectacular. But for me, that was the first time I didn't see a D or an F in English. I remember holding that paper and thinking, maybe I'm not hopeless. I can picture it clearly. She stood by my desk, paper trembling in her hand, tears rolling down her cheeks, confused and happy all at once. I remember handing her a tissue and saying, "These are good tears. You earned this." "Don't know if you realize it," she says, looking straight at me, "but those sessions with you changed everything. Not just my grades, my whole sense of myself. I stopped telling myself I was stupid. I started thinking, maybe I just learned differently. Maybe I can figure this out." I swallow the lump in my throat. "I hoped that's what was happening," I say softly. "A teacher can plant a seed, but we don't always get to see how it grows." He reaches into her bag and pulls out a neat leather notebook. "That's one of the reasons I'm here," she says, "to show you how far that seed grew." I look at the notebook, then at her, curiosity rising. "I meant what I wrote in that letter," she says. "I made myself a promise, and I've spent years working toward a place where I could keep it." I sit up a little straighter, my heartbeat picking up again. "What promise?" I ask gently. He takes a breath and opens the notebook, flipping to a tabbed section. I see printed pages, numbers, headings. It all looks very official. She glances back up at me, her expression suddenly serious. "I promised," she says slowly, "that if I ever found success in life, I would come back for the person who first believed I was capable of it." She turns the notebook so it faces me. I don't understand yet, not fully, but I can feel something shifting in the room, like standing on solid ground and suddenly realizing there's a gentle roll beneath your feet, like the earth itself is preparing to move. I take a breath, steady myself, and lean in to see what she's about to show me. For a moment, all I can do is stare at the pages she's turned toward me. They're filled with numbers, charts, neat little tables, things that have never been my strong suit. But even without understanding every detail, I can tell this isn't some casual presentation. This is careful, thought out, serious. "Mia," I say slowly, "what am I looking at?" She takes a breath and points to the top of the page. "This," she says, "is a summary of my company's performance over the last few years. Revenue, growth, projections. I'm not showing you this to brag, I promise. I just want you to see something clearly before I say the next part." I squint at the heading and sound out the name of her business. It's one of those sleek, modern names that sounds like it belongs in a big city office tower with floor-to-ceiling windows. "You built all this?" I ask. "With a lot of help," she says. "But yes, I started it from my kitchen table after grad school. For a long time, it was just me and a laptop. Now we have offices in 3 cities and a team I'm very proud of." She smiles a little. "Work with nonprofits and small businesses, helping them tell their stories in ways that actually connect with people. All that talk you used to give us about finding the heart of the story stuck with me more than you know." I feel a small swell of pride that I try to keep from turning into tears. "I always knew you were smart," I say. "I'm glad the rest of the world figured it out too." She looks down at her hands, then back up at me, her expression suddenly very earnest. "I was in college," she says. "There was this moment, second semester, freshman year, when I almost dropped out. The work was harder than anything I'd seen. Everyone around me sounded so confident, so polished. I felt like an imposter. Like sooner or later, someone was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, 'Sorry, you don't belong here.' I know that feeling. I've heard it in the voices of so many students." "What stopped you?" I ask. She gives a small, rueful smile. "You did," she says. "There, obviously. But your voice was in my head. I remembered you sitting across from me in that classroom after school, saying, 'You're not stupid. You just haven't been given the right tools yet.' I remembered how you celebrated that first C+ with me like it was a trophy. I thought, if Ms. Collins were here, she'd tell me this is just another gap to fill, not proof that I'm not good enough." My throat tightens. "Oh, Mia," I say quietly. "So I stayed," she says. and I kept staying. Through late nights, and part-time jobs and roommates who partied too much, and professors who scared me half to death. I took every writing class I could. I found internships. I learned how to pitch ideas, how to tell a story that made people care. And every time I'd hit a wall, I'd remember those afternoons with you. She sits back a little, letting out a breath. Eventually, she continues, I graduated, got my Master S, started this business. At first, my goal was just to pay rent and not move back into some cramped, noisy apartment. But once things started working, really working, I remembered the promise I'd made to myself. She taps the page again, then turns it, revealing another set of documents beneath. This, she says, is the part that's for you. I look down. There's my name, right there in black ink. Not just Ms. Collins, but my full legal name, spelled correctly. It's printed at the top of what looks like an official financial document. My heart starts beating faster. What is this? I ask, my voice coming out smaller than I expect. It's a retirement account, she says softly. In your name, fully funded, managed by a firm I trust with my own money. She pauses, searching my face. I know that might sound scary or confusing. I brought a full booklet, and I also have a financial advisor on standby who can answer every question you might have. In simple terms, this means you don't have to worry about money the way you've been worrying. The room goes silent. I hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside, a bird calling from the tree in the front yard. All of it feels strangely far away, as if the world has pulled back to give us space for this moment. Mia, I manage finally. I can't take this. It's too much. She leans forward, her eyes bright but steady. You haven't even heard the details yet, she says gently. Please, let me explain before you decide. I don't need details to know this is too generous, I protest. I helped you for a few months after school. I graded some essays. I gave you extra time. That's what teachers are supposed to do. It was my job. She shakes her head firmly. No, she says. Your job was to show up, teach the curriculum, mark the tests, and move on. What you did for me went far beyond that. You spent hours with me for free when you could have gone home. You used your own time, your own energy. You looked at a scared, exhausted girl and saw potential instead of a problem. You didn't have to do any of that, but you did. I feel my eyes fill with tears. I did it because someone once did it for me, I say quietly. When I was in college, I had a professor who refused to let me fail composition. She stayed after class with me, just like I did with you. Always told myself I'd pay that kindness forward. And you did, she says, to me, and to 100 other kids, I'm sure. But here's the thing, Miss Collins, paying it forward doesn't mean you're not allowed to receive it back someday. I can't seem to form words. She reaches into her bag again and pulls out another envelope, this one thicker than the one that arrived in my mailbox earlier in the week. She slides it across the table. In here, she says, is a summary in plain language. Made sure of it. No confusing jargon, just a simple breakdown. It explains that the account is fully funded and will provide you with an additional monthly income on top of your pension. Enough to cover your bills comfortably. Enough for you to buy the blueberries without circling them on the list. Enough for you to say yes if your sister asks you to go on a trip. I blink. You don't even know my sister, I say, a little dazed. She smiles. You mentioned her in class once, she says. You were telling us about someone who'd gone on a cruise and gotten sunburned on the first day because she fell asleep on a deck chair. You said you'd never been on a cruise yourself, but you'd love to. That stuck with me. Oh my, I whisper. You remember that? I remember a lot, she says. I remember you buying granola bars and keeping them in your bottom desk drawer, then pretending they were extras when you saw a kid who obviously hadn't eaten. I remember you staying behind after school to help a boy who struggled with reading, even though he wasn't technically in your class. I remember you telling me, I may not be able to fix what's going on at home, but in this classroom, you're safe and you're capable. Tears spill over now, and I don't bother wiping them away. I said that, I ask. Yes, she says simply. And I believed you. You didn't fix everything, of course. You couldn't. You gave me a place where I didn't feel like a failure. You showed me I had a mind worth using. That changed the entire trajectory of my life. She takes a breath. So please, she continues softly, let me do this for you. Let me say thank you in a way that actually matches what you gave me. This isn't charity. This is gratitude. This is me honoring the promise I made to my younger self that if I ever had enough, I'd go back for you. Look at her, this woman who used to be a frightened girl in my class, and I feel something inside me give way. A mixture of pride, disbelief, and a deep, aching kind of joy washes over me. I don't know what to say, I admit. She smiles, her own eyes shiny now. You used to tell us, she says, when you don't know what to say, start with the truth. I let out a watery laugh. Did I really say all these wise things? I ask. All the time, she says. Drove us crazy sometimes. We both laugh, and the sound feels like a release. The truth, I say slowly, is that I'm overwhelmed and scared. She nods. I understand, she says. That's why nothing needs to happen today. I'm not here to pressure you into signing anything on the spot. I'm here to lay this in front of you as an option, a gift that's already wrapped and ready. You can take a week, a month, however long you need to think about it. You can have a lawyer look it over. You can call the advisor I work with and ask every question in the book. If at the end of all that you still feel like it's too much, we can change the plan. But I hope you'll at least consider the possibility that you're allowed to receive this. I look down at the envelope. The idea of enough has always felt distant, like something meant for other people. People with bigger salaries, bigger houses, bigger lives. I chose teaching, knowing it wouldn't make me rich. I never regretted that. But I won't pretend I haven't worried about medical bills, about inflation, about outliving my savings. There have been nights I've lain awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what would happen if something big went wrong. What if I say yes? I ask quietly. Her face softens. Then, she says, we formalize everything. The account is already funded, so there's no waiting period. Your monthly income goes up. You can repair what needs repairing in this house. You can travel a bit if you want. Donate to causes you care about. You can exhale. It's such a simple word. But in that moment, it feels like the most luxurious thing in the world. I don't want to take advantage of you, I say. You're not, she answers. If it helps, think of it this way. Companies spend ridiculous amounts of money on consultants, coaches, and leadership retreats trying to teach their employees what you taught me in a free classroom, with your time, your patience, your faith. You were my first mentor. Every success I've had is built in some small way on that foundation. This is my way of acknowledging that. I close my eyes for a moment and picture her as she was then, young, tired, sitting in the back row, trying so hard not to be noticed. I remember the evening light slanting across the desks, the sound of the custodians, vacuum cleaners in the hallway, the way her face lit up when she began to understand something that had once felt impossible. When I open my eyes, she's looking at me with that same mixture of hope and fear. Okay, I say softly. I'll consider it. Seriously. I'll read everything. I'll ask questions. And if it all looks the way you say it does, I'll say yes. Her shoulders drop in relief, and she lets out a shaky breath. Thank you, she whispers. That's all I ask. We spend the next hour going over the documents. She explains everything patiently, never talking down to me, never rushing. A few times she stops and says, "This part is confusing. Let's simplify it," and pulls out a notepad to sketch out an example. I find myself smiling at the role reversal, the student teaching the teacher now. At one point, I ask, why now? Why not 10 years from now? Why not later? She pauses. Because I don't want to wait until it's too late, she says simply. My mom waited her whole life to feel secure. Every time it looked like things were starting to get better, something would happen, a layoff, a medical emergency, a bad relationship. I remember her saying once, maybe in my next life I'll get to rest. She looks at me with a fierce kind of tenderness. "I don't want that for you," she says. "You've spent your entire life giving. Giving time, giving energy, giving belief to kids who didn't have much of it at home. You deserve to experience what it feels like for someone to give back to you while you can still enjoy it." I reach across the table and place my hand over hers. "Thank you," I say, "not just for this, for coming here, for remembering." She squeezes my hand. "How could I forget?" she says. "You're the reason I believed I could do any of this." Eventually, she has to go. We stand at the door, and I hug her a little longer than is probably necessary, but she hugs me back just as tightly. As she walks down the path to her car, she turns and waves. "I'll call you in a week," she says. "No pressure, just to check in." "I'll be here," I say. When the door closes, the house feels both bigger and smaller at the same time. I carry the envelope back to the table and sit down. For a while, I don't open it. I just rest my hand on top of it, feeling the weight. Later that evening, I make myself a cup of tea and settle in with the documents. It takes time, but slowly, the pieces start to make sense. The numbers feel less like a foreign language and more like a map, one that leads to a future I never thought I'd have. Over the next few weeks, there are phone calls with her advisor. There's a meeting at the bank. There's a moment where I almost back out, not because anything looks wrong, but because it still feels like too much. Each time I waver, I hear her voice in my head, echoing my own words back to me. "You're allowed to receive this." The end, I sign. Years pass. The practical changes are small at first, but profound. I stop circling items on the grocery list. I buy fresh fruit without calculating how long I have until my next check. When my washing machine starts making a worrying noise, I schedule a repair instead of praying it holds on one more year. My sister calls and says, "They're running a special on a river cruise in Europe, can you imagine? It's still a lot of money, but I just had to tell you about it." Something inside me shifts. "How many days?" I ask. 10, she says. "But don't worry, I know that's impossible. I just thought I'd love to go," I say, surprising us both. "Let's do it." There's a long pause on the line. "Are you serious?" she asks. "I am," I say. "I've been given a gift. It's time I actually used it." On that cruise, watching the sun set over unfamiliar cities, listening to the gentle lap of water against the boat, I think about all the choices, all the small moments that led me there. I think about a girl in an oversized sweatshirt, sitting in the back row. I think about staying after school when I was tired, about buying granola bars, about writing, "You can do this," in the margins of her papers. I think about karma, not the dramatic kind people joke about online, where someone cuts you off in traffic and then immediately gets pulled over. Not some cosmic scoreboard keeping track of every tiny slight and reward. No, what I've come to believe is that karma, at least in this life, often moves quietly. It moves through the choices we make when no one's watching. It grows in the gaps between "it's not my job" and "I can help anyway." It takes root in the small, ordinary moments when we decide to be kind instead of indifferent, generous instead of guarded. Sometimes it takes years, decades, even for those seeds to bloom. Sometimes they bloom in ways we never expected. In my case, karma arrived in the form of a letter in a cream-colored envelope and a woman at my door who used to be a frightened girl in my classroom. It arrived in the form of financial security, yes, but it also brought something even more precious: the knowledge that my life's work mattered. That all those nights grading papers and all those conversations after class left a mark that didn't fade when the grades were entered and the diplomas were handed out. If you're listening to this and wondering whether your quiet efforts, your unseen act of kindness, your late nights showing up for someone who can't give you anything in return, if you're wondering whether any of that actually matters, let me tell you this: it does. You may not get a letter in the mail or a formal "thank you" years later. You may never know the full impact of what you did, but that doesn't mean it didn't plant something important in someone's life. Doesn't mean karma isn't working slowly, gently in the background. We don't always get to see the full circle. I was one of the lucky ones who did. These days, when I sit at my kitchen table, yes, still the same wobbly one, I don't worry the way I used to. I still clip a coupon now, and then out of habit. I still buy the cheaper brand sometimes, but I also buy the blueberries without hesitation. I plan trips with my sister, donate a little extra to the school's scholarship fund every year, imagining kids like Mia finding their way. Sometimes I get emails from former students. They'll write things like, "You once told me I was a good writer, and that's why I majored in journalism." Or, "You probably don't remember me, but you helped me through a really hard year." I write back to every single one. I tell them I'm proud of them, that their stories matter, that they mattered, because they did, they do, and so do you. If you've spent years pouring into others, teaching, caregiving, mentoring, listening, without expecting anything in return, I hope you'll let this story be a little reminder that the universe has a long memory. The good you put out there doesn't just vanish. It may travel a winding road. It may take its time, but it has a way of finding its way back to you, often when you need it most. Taught her student for free decades later, the surprise gift. That's my story. As you go back to your own day, your own kitchen table, your own list of worries and hopes, I want to leave you with a gentle thought. Think of one small kindness you've given that nobody else really saw. Hold it in your mind for a moment and trust that it mattered more than you know. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of a teacher, a mentor, or someone who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself, I invite you to hold them in your thoughts today. Maybe even reach out if you can. Sometimes the simplest thank you is its own kind of karma coming full circle.